Welcome, young adventurer. Come in, come in. I'm the Archmage, and frankly, I'm thrilled you made it to the tower today. You know, you've learned your spells, you've sharpened that blade of yours, but the true test, well, that lies in the sheer chaos of battle. So, for today's explainer, I'm going to conjure up some magical illusions of Masters of the Universe figures to walk us through the precise, absolutely unyielding rules of turn-based action. Study these illusions carefully, my apprentice, because mastering these mechanics is literally the only way you're going to survive when the real swords are drawn.
Okay, our agenda for this explainer is actually quite simple. We're going to cover setting up the battlefield, initiative and turn order, size, space, and movement, mastering tactical positioning, and finally, actions in combat. Let's get right into it. Section 1. Setting up the battlefield. Preparing for the ambush.
So, before you even think about swinging that sword, you must understand the rules of engagement. Every combat begins with the setup phase, which has 3 very rigid steps. First, the narrator sets the scene. They figure out exactly where everyone's standing and what the environment looks like. Second, we determine surprise. Imagine Skeletor trying to sneak right up onto the drawbridge of Castle Grayskull. The narrator is going to call for ability checks. And listen, if you're caught off guard, you are surprised. That means absolutely no moving, no actions, not even a reaction on your first turn. You're just frozen. Finally, any participants who are actually aware will roll initiative to establish the turn order.
Now here is the absolute most crucial point to remember, my apprentice. During all this orchestrated chaos, exactly 6 seconds of game world time passes in a standard combat round. Just 6 seconds. Every step you take, every swing of your axe, every single spell you weave, it all happens simultaneously within this frantic, incredibly brief window. It's a brilliant way to ensure every combatant gets their moment in the spotlight without time completely breaking down.
Moving right along to Section 2. Initiative and turn order. The cycle of battle.
Once the scene is set, we enter this relentless loop. Picture He-Man raising his sword as the round cycles. Every single round follows an exact 4-step sequence until one side is victorious. First, the world itself might take an action. Second, the active character takes their turn. Third, the inactive characters plan and react. And finally, the round ends, only to immediately snap right back to step 1. This cycle, it's the very heartbeat of every single engagement.
Now what's really fascinating here is that initiative isn't always just a standard dexterity check. Actually, scratch that. It almost never is if you're being creative. It depends entirely on the situation you find yourself in. For instance, if Man-at-Arms is using his wisdom to spot a hidden assassin before they strike, well, his initiative is going to be a wisdom perception check. Or, let's say you're thrust into a high-stakes wagon race. You'd roll a dexterity land vehicles check for initiative. Basically, your place in the turn order is completely governed by how you engage with the very start of the encounter.
Remember step 1 of that round cycle we just talked about? World actions? These are environmental bonuses or penalties with a seriously active element. If the battlefield itself attacks, say Snake Mountain violently erupting, it happens right at the very start of the round during a world action. The environment doesn't politely wait for your turn. It acts before any participants get to make a move. You must always, always respect the terrain, apprentice.
Let's compare your responsibilities because you're always an active participant. On your turn, you are a complete flurry of motion. You're moving your speed, using actions, bonus actions, maybe free actions to speak, and possibly a reaction. But off your turn, you don't just tune out. You have to watch allies like Teela, like an absolute hawk. You need to observe the shifting battlefield, plan your spells so you don't waste those precious 6 seconds, and most importantly, prepare to trigger your reaction at a moment's notice.
Okay, moving to Section 3. Size, space, and movement. Navigating the grid.
Let's see how all this builds our understanding of physical space on the battlefield. It's like a giant puzzle. A tiny creature controls just a 2.5-foot square, while a titanic beast, they command 25 feet or more. Now, notice how a medium creature, let's say Beastman, commands a 5-foot square. Because of basic geometry, he can only ever be surrounded by a maximum of 8 other medium creatures, or 4 large ones. Understanding this math is absolutely crucial. It prevents you from being completely overrun.
But what happens if you force a large enemy, like Trapjaw, into a narrow 5-foot Castle Grayskull corridor? Well, he's squeezing, and this triggers some truly severe mechanical penalties. His movement speed is completely halved, he suffers disadvantage on attack rolls and dexterity saving throws, and crucially, any attacks made against him have advantage. Listen, using the environment to force an enemy to squeeze, that is a literal masterclass in gaining tactical advantage.
Now, if you are lucky enough to ride BattleCat into the fray, you absolutely must memorize these exact limitations and defensive bonuses. Mounting or dismounting, that'll cost you half your movement for the turn. However, being mounted actually grants you half cover against melee attacks. That's a glorious +2 to your armor class. But beware, if you get knocked prone, you've got to make a DC 10 dexterity save or you fall right off. And if your poor mount is knocked down, you better use your reaction to dismount and land on your feet, or you're going right down with it.
Speaking of falling, being prone is an incredibly dangerous state. Say Orko gets knocked to the floor, he's prone. Now he can drop to the floor for free, which is actually great if he's trying to dodge ranged attacks, since ranged attackers will have disadvantage against him. But if he tries to crawl, it costs 1 extra foot of movement for every foot he travels. If he tries to swing a weapon, he's rolling with disadvantage, and the absolute worst part? Any melee attacker within 5 feet gets advantage. Getting back on his feet is going to cost half his total movement for the turn.
All right, Section 4, Mastering Tactical Positioning, Gaining the Upper Hand.
You have to remember, the battlefield is three-dimensional. Knowing where to stand is just as important as knowing how to swing your weapon. Imagine Stratos diving from 5 feet above to gain an expertise die on his melee attack, or Evelyn pulling a creature from 5 feet below to get an expertise die on strength checks. And hey, if you and an ally stand on direct opposite sides of an enemy, you are flanking. That grants you both an expertise die on attacks. If an ally falls, you can use your reaction to drag them out of danger, though it'll cost you 2 extra feet of movement for every single foot you travel.
2. Just a simple +2. That is the exact increase to your passive perception if you use a bonus action to stand back-to-back with an ally without moving. As long as neither of you moves, your flanks are entirely covered. It becomes so much harder for enemies to catch you off guard. It's just a wonderfully simple, brilliant tactic for when the shadows start closing in around your party.
And finally, Section 5, Actions in Combat, Making Your 6 seconds count.
We've finally arrived at the core of the conflict, how you actually spend your action. These are your primary tools for survival. You can attack or cast a spell, obviously, but you can also dash to double your speed, or take a guarded retreat by taking the disengage action so you don't trigger opportunity attacks. You could dodge to force attackers to roll with disadvantage. You can help an ally, hide from sight, search for hidden threats, or take the ready action. And remember, taking the ready action requires your concentration if you're readying a spell to release later.
Now, this next mechanic, it's a truly deadly dance. You can use a bonus action to press the attack, aggressively targeting one specific creature to gain an expertise die on your melee attacks against them. But be careful, because doing so means all attacks against you have advantage until your next turn. It's super risky. But on the flip side, if someone presses the attack against you, you can use your reaction to fall back. You just instantly yield 5 feet backwards without provoking opportunity attacks, and boom, you completely negate their expertise die against you.
Sometimes you just need to run. If you need Panther to cover maximum ground, you take the sprint action. You're focusing entirely on pure speed here. No other actions, no reactions allowed. If you're unencumbered, your speed is literally quadrupled for the turn, or tripled if you are carrying a bit more weight. You do have to move in a straight line, though you can change direction each new turn you sprint. And you can only maintain this sprint for a number of turns equal to your Constitution modifier. After that, you've got to pass escalating DC 10 athletics checks to avoid fatigue. Oh, and one more thing. While sprinting, attacks against you have advantage, so you are heavily exposed.
What if you find yourself cornered in a dungeon by Merman? Well, you can attempt to tumble. Using an action or even a bonus action, you make a dexterity saving throw against your enemy's combat maneuver DC. If you succeed, you basically dive right through their hostile space. If you're smaller than the creature, you actually get advantage on this save. If you're larger, you have disadvantage. It's just a brilliant, highly cinematic way to escape a deadly bottleneck.
As the sacred texts say, the battlefield itself can be as active a participant in turn-based action as the characters are. I want to leave you with that piece of ancient wisdom. Never forget that you aren't just fighting monsters, you are fighting the environment, the space, the size, the positioning, the very ground you walk on. These are the tools of a true master of combat.
Study these rules closely, my apprentice, because out there in the real world, the dice show absolutely no mercy. You now know how to move, how to position yourself, and how to spend every single precious second of your turn. So, I have to ask, do you have what it takes to survive Skeletor's ambush and roll for initiative?